Welcome, everyone. We are live. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. And tonight we have with us Mr. Travis White. And before we get started talking to him, let's jump over here and get going with what we know what to do.
I'm April Tribe Juke. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. I believe we are all made with light, and light is hope. This podcast brings authors who write stories of hope to all of you. Your journey to be inspired and amplified by these stories starts now.
And now we are back. So welcome, everybody. We are excited that you are here. And you can see I have an amazing individual here. His name is Mr. Travis White. And Travis, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm born and raised in Marshall, Texas, East Texas, and been married to my beautiful wife for fixing to be 34 years here in a couple of months. We have two amazing adult kids, and we've been blessed to have about 127 other children live with us over the course of our life. And now it's just me and my wife. She works at a private school with international students and then does coaching with me now. So that's an exciting thing that she's joined into the business.
Wow, incredible. So I can't help to catch that number of 127 kids.
We had over the course of seven or 8 years, we had 27 foster girls. And then we moved into the school where she currently works and had international boys live with us. And there was about 105 over the course of 7 or 8 years then.
Wow, incredible. What an opportunity for them to feel the love of East Texas.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what drew you to have this connection with youth and bring them into your home?
Well, first of all, and maybe everybody says this, but I think my wife is probably one of the most amazing mothers on the planet. When it came to all those kids we raised, I was the fun guy when things was great and the disciplinarian when things weren't. But I give my wife 90% credit. I was working as an administrator with a boys' home, and she came home one day and said, I kind of feel like the Lord's calling me to get involved as well, because we always loved children. We worked with children in the community, worked with children through church. And so it just was a natural fit. And after 15 years, we were finally ready to kind of just do us again.
Amazing. What an opportunity to give that light to somebody else. And speaking of light, do you have your book with you? You can hold it up there.
I do. There it is.
Yeah. Okay. It says, We Are All Fireflies.
Yeah.
So share with us a little bit about that title, and then we're going to jump into the book.
Yeah. Well, the title, first of all, just about everybody that's in their 40s and above probably can remember childhood experiences of catching fireflies in the jar, watching them glow. So that's the first connection. The second connection is, first of all, deeply spiritual, the idea that we all carry a light within us. And then in my childhood, when I started collecting fireflies, was one of the 2 times that I was sexually abused. And I used to put the fireflies in my window at night, hoping that light would protect me from the things that came in the dark. And so that's how that title naturally came about.
Amazing. What a wonderful opportunity to allow everybody to understand that they do have that light. And you mentioned that you hoped that those little lights would protect you when the dark came. So what happened? How did that go?
Well, it didn't go too well, and because that light wasn't meant to protect me. Fast forward many years from my childhood, I lived probably 2/3 of my life in bondage to things that I wasn't fully aware of how deeply they were affecting me. And when I was at the lowest point in my life, I remember sitting with a great friend at a coffee shop. I was sitting there at a crossroads trying to figure my life out. I hadn't even thought about writing the book. I was just trying to get my life in order. And I was sitting there talking to him, and I uttered the word that it took me 40 years to utter. I need help. And we were crying together, talking together. And naturally, as I went into the story of letting him know for the first time that I was sexually abused as a child, the conversation went to fireflies. And I told him that story that I just shared with you guys. And he looked at me and made a profound statement, which it was a paradigm shift in my life, as well as it's what birthed the mantra in my heart of my book. He looked at me and he said, "You know, Travis, those fireflies' light never was meant to protect you. That's their light." And he said, "How do you not know that you're the firefly and you've just lost connection to your light?" And so, in between weeping like a baby for how true that was, um, it hit me. That was the truth. I knew God loved me. I knew my family loved me. I blessed with many friends. It was me that didn't love myself because of what happened to me as a child. I had lost connection to that light. So, in that process of healing, I went away to two different places, worked with some sexual abuse experts, and I was sitting on the side of a mountain in Tennessee on a large boulder. And that mantra from my book came into my heart. We carry all the light we will ever need to illuminate all the darkness we will ever face. And so at that point, when I was having a yell fest with God, I said, if you redeem my story and get me out of this pain and help me stop making all the mistakes I've made in life, you can have my story for whatever you want it. And be careful what you promise God, because a few months later, he started pricking my heart with the idea that, okay, I want you to share the story with the world, because your journey, as painful as it is, and the light you live in now, people need to hear that. Anybody that's been through any kind of traumatic experience, but especially sexual abuse, and especially men too, because we don't talk about things like that.
That's very true. And I have to tell you, Miss Kathy Studer, she also growing up was abused. Mr. John Michael Lander, his story is incredible as well. And these guests are here making incredible comments, and I'm so grateful that you guys are here. And like you said, John, our light is always within us. We need to find a way to let it shine again.
Yeah.
Very, very, very true. And so within that paradigm shift, very true, John. You don't talk about that. I think the shame that happens with men, and I can't speak for myself, it's like monstrously even more.
Yeah.
Because the roles are so different from men and women, and it just has this connotation with it. And so when you went to therapy and started to work through these things, how did you know what you were going to put into the book?
Well, uh, I would like to say it was real hard and a challenge, but once I opened my heart up, and I tell people, our culture teaches us that vulnerability is a weakness, but I learned in my healing process, vulnerability is a superpower. And when I opened my heart up and learned that brokenness was the beginning of freedom and healing, it just all started downloading in me. And the central thing that became the reason I wrote the book the way I did is that what was damaged inside of me had nothing to do with being sexually abused as a child. That abuse ended. Me being in bondage 40 years later, I was not under that power. What I was under the power of was my own internal narrative. And in that process, I learned not only sexual abuse, but any kind of trauma and pain. We're all writing this story 24/7 in our mind. It's the way humans are wired. Every thought, feeling, experience is being journaled in our mind. Now, the good things, they're great. They go into our unconscious and we can recall them very easily. But the things that spark fear and spark shame, painful experiences, trauma like sexual abuse, we hide those things. We don't want to deal with them, but they're still inside of us. And they're creating a narrative that starts out as feelings that come and go. So when I was younger, I would constantly be plagued by the idea that I felt worthless. But there was a shift at a point in my life, I think near the end of my 6-year struggle with drugs and alcohol, where all of a sudden I noticed my narrative had changed. I was no longer saying I felt worthless. I was saying I am worthless.
You just
Feeling.
accepted that at that point. I no longer feel it. This is me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm worthless,
Yeah.
period.
The feeling becomes an identity, and that's when things get really bad. And what happens for most of us, it'll spark things like anger, anxiety, depression, low self-worth. And then we begin to either avoid or medicate or try to deal with those things. And we never get to the depth of where that came from. Like everything in the universe, everything has a birth and a power source. And I learned that my narrative had a birth and had a power source. I was the power source. I was the one telling myself I was worthless and unlovable. My past abusers, nobody else in my life had anything to do with the bad choices I made. I made them because of that feeling of worthlessness, that identity that I was worthless. And when I awakened to the idea that we all carry this narrative inside of us, and I began to discover that narrative and how it tied in with my deep, deep secret struggle with anxiety, I realized where the power was. What I thought was a self-protect from my childhood abuse ended up being a prison I built with my own words. And once I realized that, I realized, you know what? I've been powerful all my life. I've just been using the power in the wrong ways. I let it create what I called in the book that monster. And all I did was run from the monster. And the choice 6-year-old Travis made when I met the man that would be my dad for 41 years, when he adopted me after he met my mom, the choice I made at 6 years old was I can't let him know my dark secret or he'll leave us. And when he made my mom smile on their first date, I was on the first date with them. You'll have to read that in the book. That was pretty cool. But he made her smile. And I said, you know what? That's what I want to do with all of my life is I want to make people happy. And so I did. I set out in life to make people happy. I was always the jokester. I always loved everybody. I never judged anybody. I served others. And while that's great, I was really doing that all out of this bondage of darkness. And as long as I was helping others and doing for others, I didn't hear the monster. And when I would get quiet, the monster would come up. And that's where I struggled with all the things that I struggled with on and off for 40 years, which is pretty much almost everything you can think of, which is another reason I wrote the book. I've made just about every mistake you can make by holding on to fear and shame for too long by yourself. When I was a kid, I was accident prone, and my dad always used to joke and tell people that boy don't just fall off the ladder, he hits every rung on the way down. That's the same way my journey from bondage to healing, from darkness to light was. I made just about every mistake I could. But the good in that now, and God promises all things you give to him, he'll redeem and use. The good in that now is that I can identify with almost everybody because I've struggled with just about everything you can struggle with.
Powerful, powerful words. I wanted to share with you some of these things that, like John Michael is saying, that vulnerability is a superpower. He says, I love that. Um, he says the meaning that we repeat to ourselves in order to try to understand and survive. It's really interesting how we're thinking that that's a protection, and like you said, really what we're doing is building that cage, and I call it the comfort cage. It's built with pain, fear, the lies that we tell ourselves, and man, some of them are nice and thick walled, but it's not going to stay there all the time, right? Kathy
Right.
says shame encourages poor coping choices to numb the pain. That's really true. These are really mistakes but they lead you. Did they lead you back to light?
Well, it's kind of a both and. Everything that I struggled with for 40 years on and off all became a part of the superpower of what healed me. And it all had to do with that narrative. I went from a narrative of darkness, a narrative of fear and shame. And I just learned through the process, which I share in my book and I share with clients all the time, that process from darkness to light, to freedom, which is the first section of the book. I learned that everything can be used for good, used for positive. I'm an East Texan, so I've got a lot of country boy analogies, but it's kind of like a pasture full of cow manure. A lot of people would just call it cow manure, but in reality, if you take it and use it in a different way, it can fertilize a garden and grow amazing food. And that's the way I look at all the problems and mistakes I made in my life. God took them and we turned them inside out, and we used them for good. We used them to grow me into freedom. And then ultimately, the second part of my journey was healing all of the things that had broken inside of me for 40 years. You know, I had to turn that narrative inside out and do what I tell clients. I had to learn to master my internal narrative, you know, and I think that's born out of what I tell clients and people all the time is we're constantly telling that story. And when we're in the midst of chaos or pain, we sometimes tell really bad stories. And that's where those limiting beliefs are born. And then as children in the midst of chaos or pain, we really tell poor stories sometimes. But the thing we're trying to do is we're always trying to find balance in the chaos. We're God wired that way. You know, the universe works well in balance and works bad in chaos. Things happen, bad things happen. I was 7 years old sitting on a bicycle in front of our poor little rent house where I was being sexually abused for the second time. And I was trying to make sense. Why can't I tell mom and dad? Why do I keep going to that man's house when he tells me to come over? What is wrong with me? And I just started thinking with my little 7-year-old brain. And I said, well, it must be because you're just a worthless human being. And see what that did in that moment was it brought a sense of balance. And I air quote that because that's not balance. But it brought a sense of balance because then what I said to myself was, I don't have to fight anymore. These bad things happen to me because I'm a bad person and I'm worthless. So just roll on. And that went okay till I was about 16. And then the pain got so intense. My outside world, where I was happy and had a million friends, was not jiving with my inside world, where the monster was constantly reminding me of my identity. So that's when I began many years of mistakes. First of all, at 16 was the drugs and alcohol to quiet the monster.
Wow. Really, really insightful information here. Thank you so much for sharing this vulnerability with us because it is tough. And I'm sure there are people out there who relate to pieces of this. And like you said, that's why you wrote the story to help someone else, to get them through another place. And John says, we're conditioned or groomed by those who we are surrounded by because we're sponges and absorb everything that develops into those thoughts. Very, very interesting. Do you have anything to say about that, Travis?
Well, it's true. And those that surrounded us, I lived kind of an enigma because when my dad entered my life at age 6, and my stepdad, but he was really my dad, my mom, they were amazing parents. I didn't have a bad childhood. I had a dark childhood. And the reason it was that way was because when my biological father abused me at 5, I was trying to protect my then single mother. And I felt terrible that I couldn't protect her. Her second husband, she was married to for about 6 months. I remember the last day I saw him, he held a gun to her head, and I don't know why. And my wife and I think maybe he was one of my abusers, and all of those 3 times wasn't my biological father. But he didn't shoot the gun. He then held it to his own hand and passed out. But being surrounded by my biological father and that man up to age 5, and then when my amazing dad came in my life, the shame had already taken over. And I'm like, I can't break up what's good. We have a family now. And if I tell them how bad I am and what's happened to me, dad will leave us. And so again, from 7 to 9, I was surrounded by this man in the neighborhood that groomed me and introduced me to this younger man. And I was just a sponge. And I never could understand it. I mean, I've had people ask me, why didn't you just tell your mom and dad? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you refuse to ride your bike down the street to that man's house? And I said, well, until you've lived in the depths of shame and worthlessness, it's hard to really explain how imprisoning that is to your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. You just feel like that's the way you're supposed to live. When you become an adult and you know better, what happens is until we challenge that broken narrative inside of us, it's never going to change. And so for a lot of us, myself included, you just medicate it. And I see what John put there. part of my healing process, John, was I did finally forgive myself intensely. And it was a very powerful experience for me because I tell people I've only ever hated one person my whole life, and it was neither of my abusers. It was me. And so when I reached that point of self-discovery years ago and was sitting on that rock on the side of the mountain in Tennessee, man, forgiveness and the chains began to come undone. I wish it was an overnight change, but it wasn't, because being in bondage to fear and shame for 40 years messes up the system that is us greatly. So it took me about a year to walk through the process of healing how I see myself in the world and how I feel the world sees us, and how I deal with the inner voice now, how I live mastering my internal narrative, and it's a positive thing in me now. How I healed, how I valued myself, which that's all the second part of the book. That's the healing process that I went through. But yeah, I had a one of the people I was seeing years back in Minnesota. I asked him, I said, "You're a professional, I'm a professional. I help people with this and can't help myself. Tell me why I kept going to that man's house on and off for 3 years and never told a soul." And it's kind of like something John said a while ago. My little kid brain actually thought that maybe that was a kind of love. And man, it was hard to hear that. I broke down in tears. But I asked him, why did I keep going to that man's house? And he asked me a very profound question. And I won't share the gory details, but he said, when that man was forcing you to view pornography and forcing you to reenact that pornography, what did you notice? And it's funny, the way he asked the question, it's like he knew what my answer was going to be. I looked at him and I said, I noticed all the people in those pictures and videos are happy and they're smiling. And he said, exactly. What did 6-year-old you say you wanted to do for the whole world? You wanted to make them smile. And so, in a weird sense, as a little kid who doesn't have the understanding, you almost felt nurtured by this man, even though you felt the pain of it. So you didn't know how to get out of it. The shame told you that if your loving parents find out about it, they're not going to blame him. They're going to think you're messed up. And I know that's insane to some people that's never experienced abuse, but that's the depth of the story we tell ourselves. That's how it's so powerful. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why I do what I do for a living. And that's why I do what I'll do for the rest of my life, is I want to help people find that light inside themselves, overcome any past fear, shame, trauma, pain. And I'd like to help them do it without having to suffer as many of the mistakes that I made.
It's so true. Travis, thank you so much for sharing such intense yet redeeming opportunities. So it is what John says here. It is so easy for outsiders to just ask these questions if you've never experienced it. Because when you are in the middle of it, you can't know anything else. And they prey upon children for a reason. And Kathy says they simply want to be liked and loved. And that's the most evil, when they prey upon the innocent, because at those moments we've had to hold on to love and nurture for our life, right? As an innocent baby, you can't feed yourself, you can't change yourself, you are dependent upon so many. And when they take advantage of that through change and what have you, it is so destructive. And I
Yeah.
think about, as I call him, Satan, the destroyer, as he puts these thoughts and ideas into people's minds to damage children, because a damaged child, if not healed, possibly could then damage more as they grow up, possibly. Or they keep themselves trapped and damaged, like you said. The only person you hated in the world was yourself. And the destroyer just laughs and mocks at that because he feels like he's won. So on that time when the chains are falling off and you've changed the narrative, he lost somebody pretty big that day. So good job. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Man.
it was actually a beautiful process, even though it was painful. And I'd say that to clients all the time. I say, look, this may get more painful before it gets better. But I say it's like this: the pain you were feeling in bondage to whatever trauma or experience they bring into my office, I describe that as like the pain of a car accident or losing a limb. But yet the pain we're going to walk through on awakening this internal narrative and discovering the power of the limiting beliefs, that pain is like a rehabilitative pain. That pain is like going to physical therapy. Yes, it hurts, but it's not a destructive pain like the darkness and the limiting beliefs. It's a healing pain. And most of the time when you can help them see that, because it does get a little worse before it gets better, because most clients we see, the narrative that they're in bondage to is in their unconscious, which is where 90+% of our brain operation is. And they come to me dealing with anxiety or relationship struggles or depression or anger. And I tell every client, okay, I can help you with those things, but let's discover what story you told yourself that may have helped birth those things or make them worse. Let's get to the root. I don't want to give you a better Band-Aid to put on a bleeding artery. I want to find out why the artery is bleeding and heal that. And so that's what that discovery of that narrative. But what it's going to do is it may bring up a story that's been in our unconscious affecting our lives. And now we've got to bring it up into consciousness and talk through it. And why do we have to talk through the bad stuff? Because all of that bad stuff that was bondage and the lying beliefs, we're going to be able to turn it inside out and use it for good and use it for power. So we need to know what that narrative is, like the fear thing. We need to know the narrative of our fear. So I ask every person, because back on that mountain in Tennessee, sitting on that boulder, when I was having that yell fest with God, for some reason, and I don't know why, I just screamed out through the woods, and I'll say it in a clean version. I said, "What are you so effing afraid of?" And I just wept, and it instantly hit me. And that's when the awareness of the bondage of that identity I'd been in, I said to myself, I'm afraid the world's going to finally realize that I'm worthless and unlovable. Now that's painful. And the story I had to awaken to discover where that came from was painful. But now that's a superpower in my story. Discovering that helped me discover the power I had and turn to good. And that's what I get giddy helping people with. I tell people the first section of the book is kind of hard, and I'm very real and raw, and I share all of my mistakes I made. But by the time we get to chapter 4, we've hit the point where, look, if we flip our belief, because our belief system was hacked, so for 40 years, I believed that I was worthless and unlovable. And when I finally flipped that belief system and took the power back from the darkness, from the monster, I call him, I was able to say, no, I believe that I'm a child of God. I believe that I'm loved. I believe that I'm enough. Now, I knew those things for a long time. I'd been a believer since 1988, and I gave God all of my life except that. Because I told myself, I have to fix that because I'm not worthy enough to even ask God for help. And so when I finally got the freedom of that, I realized knowledge alone is not power. It doesn't elicit movement. We have to take back our hacked belief system. And when I began believing the things that I had known for a long time, I was able to cast out all of those limiting beliefs and lies. And then the beautiful healing process begins.
Amazing. Amazing. Kathy says the bondage release becomes our firefly light.
Indeed.
Michael says, I love that you wrestled with God, which shows the love you have. He also says, it's important to understand that the monster within us and the struggle is from within. So many times we look outward for answers and for blaming when it's right here to do the changing.
Yeah.
Very true. Very, very true.
My external, and there's a thing I call in the book, flipped economies. We're supposed to get our worth and our value and our joy and all those things, they're intrinsic. They're supposed to come from within, like John said. But when we can't find them from within because we're in that prison of darkness and believing those lying beliefs, we look to the outside. So that was the Fireflies at age 6. And it was the yellow raincoat my granddad got me at age 7 that felt secure and safe. And it was the cowboy boots that I wore when I was a little kid because it gave me courage, like all the Western heroes on the television and the movies. And then as a teenager, the tools, the external tools to cope became very adult and much more damaging: drugs and alcohol and pornography. But all of them were trying to find an external value system. My attempt at making friends with everybody in the world, always cutting up in class, making people laugh. It was like using sticks to gird up an external value system when I never was meant to find my value in those things. And man, when I awakened to all that, it was just, I mean, it was a couple of weeks, maybe a month of just weeping, but a joyful, healing weeping, to realize that my value system never went away. God never took it from me. Those abusers didn't take it from me. I stopped believing in it when I began believing in the lies. So that was the power of flipping that and flipping that light switch on, so to speak, and begin believing the truth about who I was, and replanting or reawakening really this value system within, that I am worthy because I'm a child of God.
Amazing. Amazing. Travis, thank you so much. And I feel like, in this last minute, is there anything you'd like to leave as a message to our listeners tonight?
Well, I guess I'll end where we started, because I just believe so much in the power of this comment. And if it stirs questions in somebody's mind when they hear it, look me up, get the book. I'm not just trying to sell books. I believe in helping people find their light. The theme of my business is helping people turn limiting beliefs into limitless potential. But I'll just close by repeating that mantra that God gave me many years ago. You carry all the light you will ever need to illuminate all the darkness you will ever face. Sometimes we just need some help connecting to it.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. And his book is called We Are Fireflies. And finding that light within is so important. And y'all know that this beacon of light over here is just attracting to as much light as possible to amplify this message out. So thank you, Travis. I think it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kathy, for all of your great comments. And we pray that this will go out there and help somebody else. There's so much light to happen. Thank you so much. We'll see everybody. Bye-bye.